There is a moment in every civilization where the visible story and the real story begin to separate. At first, the difference is almost impossible to detect. Institutions continue functioning, governments continue speaking, markets continue moving, churches continue preaching. The machinery still appears intact, but underneath it, something else begins to happen. Networks harden, power centralizes, systems begin protecting themselves instead of the people they were supposedly built to serve. And eventually, if you watch closely enough, you realize something deeply unsettling is happening. The people operating the machinery no longer believe they are temporary custodians of power. They believe they are its rightful inheritors. Welcome back to the Orsus Series. This is Convergence, Book 3, the final book in the first series. It is not merely a continuation of the story, it's more a recognition. Because by Book 3, the question is no longer, or should be, who are these people? The question is, how long has the machine actually existed? And more importantly, what happens when you finally learn to recognize its architecture? The past is a map, the present is a weapon. The machine. At the start of Book 1, a young soldier accidentally overhears something deep underground that is so consequential that the power behind the machine spend over 75 years tracking it down. He carried the single most important intelligence leak in human history and didn't understand a word of its significance. One of the central ideas behind convergence is very simple. It's that systems survive, empires may collapse, governments may fall, wars do end, and ideologies consume themselves. But the systems, the administrative systems, the financial systems, the institutional systems, that which enables continuity, they persist. They reroute. That is what this book is about. Not conspiracy in the cartoon sense, not secret handshakes in darkened rooms, but something much worse. The gradual alignment of political power, institutional memory, economic continuity, intelligence infrastructure, faith structures, and administrative protection. Until eventually the system begins behaving like an organism. Not because anyone designed it that way, but because that is what systems naturally become when they survive long enough. And the terrifying possibility at the centre of convergence is this. What if somebody recognised that pattern centuries ago? And what if they learned how to guide it? Point Edward. In Convergence, the story moves to Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia, a forgotten Cold War installation. Point Edward, Site C. It's flooded, partially abandoned, and maintained just enough to avoid collapse. It's the kind of place that bureaucracies forget but never quite relinquish, and that distinction matters enormously, because abandoned systems are one thing, dormant systems are another entirely. What William, Hugo, and Dusty slowly realise is that Point Edward is not important because of what it is, it matters because of what it resembles. Its continuity, its survival architecture, a place designed for systems persistence after a catastrophe. It's not dominion itself, but it's close enough to frighten people who understand what dominion might have been. And that is where the operation called Overkill begins. Not with gunfire, not with action, but with recognition. The understanding that the most effective deception is not invention, it is amplification. You do not create a false world, you remind people of one they already half believe exists. The old equus bellici. One of the things I wanted Convergence to become was quieter, older, more exhausted. By this stage, William, Hugo, and Dusty are no longer adventurous men charging towards mystery. They are veterans, men who have spent centuries watching institutions mutate into versions of itself. And Point Edwards becomes emotionally important because Dusty helped to build it. Then he abandoned it, not through failure, through necessity. He is not reopening a bunker. He is reopening an older version of the Equus Bellici itself. And that melancholy matters, because one of the recurring themes in Orsus is that the people opposing the machine are not untouched by it. You cannot study systems for centuries without understanding them intimately, and perhaps without beginning to resemble them slightly yourself. That possibility disturbs Helen profoundly in Convergence, not because William becomes corrupted, because she realizes he may now understand the organism far too well. A recognition. There is a line in Convergence which helps to probably define the entire book. William says, "We don't convince him, we remind him." And that is the operation. That is overkill. That is Point Edwards. And in many ways, that is the entire Orsus series. The machine survives because human beings continually rebuild versions of it. Selection, refinement, stabilization, control. Over and over again. The names change, the architecture remains. And by the end of Convergence, the real horror is no longer there is a conspiracy, it is the system no longer requires conspirators to survive. It continues on its own account. It has institutional gravity, administrative instinct. It has continuity. Here is an excerpt from chapter 23, Krypton 7. It is an incontrovertible fact that certain words and phrases throughout history have functioned not merely as language but as signals. They trigger recognition, a raised eyebrow, a silenced room, a cocked ear, or the faint ironic smile of those already initiated. Some are famous, and some become shorthand for entire worlds. Watergate, the political break-in and cover-up that forced President Nixon to resign. Gladio, the clandestine NATO-backed stay-behind network that was later linked to political violence in Cold War Europe. MK Ultra, the CIA's illegal mind control and human experimentation program. Operation Paperclip, the covert transfer of Nazi scientists into the American post-war military and intelligence apparatus. Iran-Contra, the secret funding of Nicaraguan insurgents through illegal arms deals. Stasi, the East German surveillance apparatus that transformed paranoia into statecraft. These historical terms function as shibboleths, linguistic passwords that instantly signal a deep, shared understanding of political intrigue, covert operations, or institutional corruption. Others operate very differently. They are buried so deeply inside institutional memory that they cease to function as references at all. Instead, they become something closer to trauma, linguistic fault lines capable of triggering immediate silence, operational paralysis, or in rare cases, outright fear. Krypton 7 was one of those. This was not because people understood what it meant. Almost nobody did. It was because the very few who did knew enough to be afraid. So the question is what it was and who was afraid of it. This was the discussion that Taff, William, Hugo, Roger, and Molly had explored at length one night in early May 1992. Taff, without putting me into another coma, can you, in layman's terms, explain what it is and why I am thinking purely of Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman at this point? Why should we take this seriously? Hugo said, trying not to look too fierce. Bloody Philistines, and the one with Richard Pryor was top-notch. In fact, Taff was saying until William cut him off. Taff, only one warning this evening. Stick to the script, please. Right, Chief, no bother. Now then, I brought this up because it's not a shibboleth in the true sense. It's much more pernicious than that. It's fucking toxic, is what it is, he continued. You asked me a few weeks back to look at digital filth. Well, this is a malediction, an execration that makes an abomination stop looking like an obscenity. It's all right, Merlin, we get the fucking gist. What is it? Said Roger as he began teetering into frustration. Yes, right, there I go again. So he took a sip of his water. Krypton 7 is the consistory's deepest post-war counterintelligence classification. It's beyond top secret. It's utterly unspeakable, sacrilegious, and possibly inviolable. You might even go as far as nefarious, perhaps? Get to the bloody point, you dozy Welsh bastard. Roger, do we have need to change his meds? The interjection came from a surprising quarter. It was Molly, and it wasn't lost on Taff. Yes, Molly, nefarious. More water was sipped, and eyes were narrowed. Hugo was now very curious. What sort of inviolable filth are we talking about exactly? Well, if we could concoct something, or in fact a lot of things, that they would refer to as impossible, they would constitute a contamination event. Taff said with what everybody hoped was some finality. I don't believe I'm going to say this, but Taff, could you go on, please? Such as? Said William, smiling broadly. Taff took it in his stride. Oh, right. The biggest mistake we could make is to get on the keyboards and type out some shite like activate Krypton 7, send. It's too cinematic, too obvious, and wouldn't work. What we need is someone in the consistory or in the intercept structure that operates out of Hoboken and probably elsewhere, seeing a routing tag and stops dead, reads it again, and then says quietly to themselves, who reopened that designation? Nobody answers, which tells us that this classification was never supposed to exist anymore. References to it, or anything with that tag, should feel radioactive to the consistory, and that's because Krypton 7 represents a loss of control. For centuries, the Mangonel have controlled archives, history, language, institutions, and even memory itself. Taff paused innocently. This had never happened before. What happens if we can make random acts, events, messages start to seep into their awareness? For instance, dormant accounts suddenly moving, archivists queryingly impossible references, fellowship trustees becoming nervous, Stokes noticing unexplained traffic, Vatican retrieval systems activating, people inside the consistory arguing, de Montfort beginning to suspect discovery. Somebody recognizing Krypton 7 and becoming frightened. That creates the sense that overkill is no longer an operation. It is now an environmental condition. It's a quarantine classification. The designation itself exists to contain knowledge. For them, Krypton 7 now includes the Dominion migration timetable, which was changed earlier than expected. They ask, so what? Is Consergo failing centuries ahead of projected models? We want lots of that. Classification was buried. Godfrey Jones, my Welsh wizard, said William affectionately. The next time Terry tries to prevent you from explaining your next prolix, verbose, plenioastic, tautological, turgid, laboured, pedantic, and utterly convoluted point, I shall personally take a run ashore and yomp all over his mincing fizzog. The consistory does not dominate through force alone. It dominates through recognition. People accept systems they already subconsciously understand. That is why institutions survive catastrophes that should destroy them. Because human beings instinctively rebuild familiar structures. And somebody, somewhere, is always waiting to guide that reconstruction. The machine moves. The final chapters of Convergence are deliberately quiet. No apocalyptic climax, no giant revelation, no theatrical destruction of the enemy. Because systems don't collapse like that. They migrate. Accounts move, records disappear, container routes alter, shell corporations reactivate, archivists vanish, financial conduits reroute themselves. The machine survives because systems survive, and the ending of Convergence leaves William and the Equispellaci facing a deeply uncomfortable truth. They may finally understand the organism, but understanding something is not the same as controlling it. Convergence is not a book about the end of the world. It is about the continuity of systems after the world has failed. And if there is one idea running through the entire series, it is this. The most dangerous structures in human history are rarely the visible ones. They are the systems beneath the systems. the continuity beneath the event, the architecture beneath the narrative. Because the best fiction does not invent the darkness. It simply turns the light on long enough for you to recognize that there is a shape standing in the room. And sometimes, when the light finally comes on, you realize that it has been standing there for a very, very long time. The Orsus Series, Book 3, Convergence. Available now. The Immortal series is coming soon at Di-Fanteria books.com and on YouTube at Di-Fanteria Books.